The WNBA front office just committed outright corporate sabotage against its own athletic product. They turned the highly anticipated opening week of the 2026 season into a complete, unwatchable disaster. Commissioner Cathy Engelbert designed a catastrophic system that completely destroyed the authentic flow of professional basketball to enforce an artificial standard of play.
Yo, if you love real basketball stories, deep dives, and the drama behind the game, you're in the right place. But if you want to take it to the next level, hit that join button. Members get exclusive content, early access, and behind-the-scenes drops you won't see anywhere else. Plus, you're directly supporting the channel and helping us bring you even better content. So if you rock with Basketball Spilled, become a member today. Let's keep the game alive.
The trouble completely began during the dark winter months, when the executives hid from the public. Cathy Engelbert quietly assembled a massive compliance unit under the totally fake guise of an officiating task force. Rather than protecting the actual health of the players, this executive group focused entirely on stripping away the natural physical intensity that defines elite modern basketball. They absolutely ruined the entire beautiful game in a completely closed boardroom. The league front office handed down sweeping, terrifying mandates that transformed seasoned referees into hyperactive whistleblowers. They systematically turned every single possession into an awkward, embarrassing display of total administrative control. This was never about making the sport better for the loyal fans paying massive ticket prices. The completely out-of-touch suits at the top violently pushed a hidden corrupt agenda to sterilize the product. Now it has massively blown up right in their shocked faces and sparked an unstoppable player revolt. On May 12th of 2026, a scathing investigative report published by Front Office Sports officially blew the lid off the entire operation. The explosive article officially confirmed that referees received incredibly strict instructions to penalize basic defensive posturing. This corporate directive forcefully mandated officials to aggressively hunt for microscopic infractions. The terrible whistle is effectively choking out the natural rhythm of the game during the absolute most important week of the year. The incredibly dedicated players immediately felt completely trapped by the entirely rigged system. Basketball stars found themselves stuck in a sterile environment where normal human contact was treated as a severe rule violation. This toxic corporate policy caused immediate massive outrage across every single locker room in the league. The highly paid executives expected the amazing athletes to just shut up and dribble the ball. They severely underestimated the absolute fierce pride these women take in their defensive craft. A staggering 23.1 free throws per game represents the current pathetic league average. That is an astronomical, terrifying statistic that exposes the total breakdown of competitive professional basketball. The incredibly arrogant referees are treating the authentic hardwood court like their own personal fake theatrical stage. Loyal, passionate fans are actively paying premium ticket prices to sit through endless, awful whistleblowing. They completely expected to watch the fast-paced, thrilling transitions they absolutely love and support. Instead, the actual product on the floor is totally broken and entirely unwatchable. Power-tripping referees are routinely blowing the play completely dead before defenders even establish their legal position. This pathetic reality means the actual game product has rapidly devolved into a glorified, stagnant shooting exhibition. The deeply loyal massive audience is being completely robbed of an authentic, emotional sporting experience. The executives completely wanted the athletes to play like robotic machines programmed to avoid human contact. They actively ignored the actual players who desperately pleaded with them to maintain the aggressive physical integrity of the modern professional game. The front office totally betrayed the authentic culture of the league just to appease completely detached, wealthy corporate sponsors. This disastrous, terrifying reality reached an absolute breaking point during a grueling, painful battle between the New York Liberty and the Washington Mystics. Millions of people tuned into the national broadcast to watch elite athletes play a high-speed physical game. What they unfortunately got instead was a staggering, absolute torture session that refused to end. A game that should have quickly wrapped up in 2 hours instead dragged on for an agonizing 2 hours and 41 minutes. The beautiful, natural momentum of the sport was systematically, brutally executed by the incredibly corrupt men in stripes. The authentic competitive flow was completely dead on arrival. Endless constant whistles completely sapped the precious energy right out of the massive packed arena. Thousands of completely exhausted fans were heavily forced to watch secondary foul shots instead of actual competitive action. The frustrated crowds were constantly checking their watches in total, absolute, complete disbelief. The highly paid broadcast announcers hopelessly struggled to fill the massive amounts of dead air. Endless terrible replay reviews and entirely boring foul shots completely hijacked the entire national television slot. Every single time a dedicated defender breathed heavily on an opponent, the incredibly shrill whistle blew instantly. But what the cameras completely missed was the absolute boiling frustration constantly growing on the silent, massive team benches. The highly dedicated players were aggressively biting their tongues just to avoid completely massive, devastating financial penalties from the league. The totally power-tripping officials actively mocked the desperate pleas of the totally exhausted, hard-working elite coaching staffs. New York superstar Breanna Stewart absolutely refused to stay quiet after enduring that exhausting, embarrassing display on the hardwood. She is the ultimate absolute professional and arguably the absolute hardest worker in the entire professional gym. But even a completely loyal and credible veteran like her could not stomach this entirely artificial garbage, ruining her profession. Stewart publicly, heavily, aggressively slammed the entirely terrible, totally biased officiating as completely insane. Risking massive, devastating financial penalties from the dictatorial league office, the former league MVP walked straight to the post-game press conference microphone. She instantly, forcefully put a massive target on her own exhausted back to successfully defend the total integrity of the sport. Her incredibly blunt, true statement sent massive, terrifying shockwaves straight through the corrupt corporate headquarters. She actively chose to boldly expose the broken system instead of weakly protecting her own wallet from league retaliation. Stewart knew somebody incredibly brave had to finally boldly speak the absolute, raw, undeniable truth. The cowardly, highly corrupt front office completely expected the amazing, loyal players to passively smile politely and weakly nod their heads. They absolutely never expected the strongest, massive, authentic superstars to wage a public war against the completely rigged system. The massive chaos and absolute, complete, total destruction of the game flow violently spilled right over into the next slate of games. The highly anticipated May 17th matchup featuring the Las Vegas Aces and the Atlanta Dream became the next horrible casualty of the corporate war. The two incredible teams stepped onto the court completely ready to wage a massive, highly physical, incredible battle. The arrogant officials had entirely different, completely terrible plans for the evening. While the final box score recorded a tight 85-84 victory for Las Vegas, that narrow margin completely masked a deeper officiating crisis. The power-tripping referees completely, absolutely dominated the floor from the opening tip. Corrupt officials controlled the entire flow of the match and completely ruined the viewing experience. They maliciously handed out quick, cheap personal fouls that immediately disrupted amazing team chemistry. Elite, brilliant coaches were left completely stranded on the sidelines with their game plans torn to shreds. The completely out-of-control, corrupt referees deliberately handed out cheap fouls to actively sideline the most physical, exciting players. Official box scores released on May 19th of 2026 proved exactly how incredibly rigged the system has become. Heavy statistical analysis within the verified r/WNBA community showed how drastically these terrible whistle patterns limited star player minutes. The numbers absolutely do not lie, and they paint a terrifying picture of total league control. The absolute biggest victim of this completely targeted, highly orchestrated, malicious referee campaign was Atlanta's standout Indya Nivar. The incredibly talented, tough player fell victim to the aggressive, disgusting officiating incredibly early in the game. The totally awful calls forced her exhausted bench into highly chaotic, terrible defensive rotations. Nivar was forcefully, completely trapped in awkward, terrible situations and completely stripped of her incredible aggressive identity. The arrogant officials absolutely refused to let her play any real defense and completely forced her to back off soft defensive players. Stripped of her elite ability to protect the rim, the standout guard watched helplessly from the bench. The highly anticipated massive frontcourt matchup rapidly collapsed into a completely stagnant, messy, unwatchable disaster. The highly corrupt league successfully neutralized the most incredible, exciting defensive anchor on the entire floor. They destroyed a brilliant individual performance just to forcefully maintain their completely terrible visual order. Highly touted rising rookies like Azzi Fudd are currently expressing massive public confusion regarding the total elimination of physical play. These amazing young athletes spent their entire collegiate careers mastering high-intensity, physical, authentic basketball. They completely dedicated their lives to learning how to play aggressive, tough, legitimate defense. Now they finally arrive in the massive professional league and are completely, instantly penalized for playing the exact same beautiful game. The transition is absolutely, completely, totally brutal and entirely unfair. The corrupt front office essentially set these elite young rookies up for total, massive, absolute, undeniable failure. They maliciously shifted the regulatory goalposts right as the opening tip-off of the season commenced. Audiences absolutely care because the product on the floor is rapidly becoming a complete, absolute, entirely unwatchable dumpster fire. The terrible whistle is aggressively, heavily sparking massive, intense, undeniable tribalism among the frustrated fan bases. Entire loyal, massive crowds rightfully feel their absolute favorite beloved teams are being entirely deliberately targeted by power-tripping, corrupt referees. The front office is violently, heavily waging an absolute, total, unhinged war against the passionate people who fund the league. They are actively destroying the incredibly fragile trust between the consumer and the athletic product. League executives are actively using heavy, dark financial intimidation to prevent players from supporting the public complaints made by Breanna Stewart. The highly corrupt corporate suits totally rely entirely on the massive lingering threat of huge financial fines. They absolutely heavily weaponize massive money to entirely, actively, violently silence the deeply angry locker room. Cathy Engelbert apparently truly believes that threatening players' salaries will successfully guarantee total obedience from the athletes. She desperately wants the superstars to shut their mouths and simply dribble the ball exactly how she violently dictates. The front office demands that these incredible women remain completely silent on camera while their beloved sport is degraded. The incredibly wealthy, out-of-touch, soft, terrible suits actively, constantly threaten to totally destroy the hard-earned livelihoods of the players. They absolutely think they can actively, entirely, by absolute, total, complete blind obedience. But the elite, fearless athletes are entirely waking up to the massive, undeniable reality that the league office is their ultimate true enemy. The absolutely massive, entirely unresolved burning question actively keeping everyone hooked revolves around the upcoming weekend. The entire 2026 season now completely hinges on the massive, crucial weekend slate of games as the pressure reaches an absolute boiling point. The entirely, terribly, highly corrupt league front office absolutely faces a totally massive, incredible, terrifying ultimatum. League executives face a critical, massive choice to either totally loosen the terrible whistle immediately or drop historic fines. If they arrogantly, stubbornly refuse to actively back down, a massive star will inevitably catch a huge financial penalty. The league will actively force an incredible beloved player to completely sacrifice their own hard-earned salary just to speak the truth. The entirely, incredibly beautiful season is completely, thoroughly hanging entirely perfectly by a deeply, incredibly thin, fragile thread. Commissioner Cathy Engelbert absolutely, entirely engineered the absolute, total destruction of her own pure legacy. The extremely arrogant, highly terrible executive villain is the completely, absolute sole architect of her own complete, undeniable downfall.